Hello, this is Richard Cook. I'm here to tell you some of the stories behind my pictures, and today I'd like to tell you about working with the nuclear submarines. Back in 1976 I was commissioned by the Illustrated London News to do a piece about our nuclear deterrent. So I went off to Faslane, which is the submarine base in Scotland on the Gairloch, and I took some pictures of HMS Repulse, which is one of the 4 Polaris boats that was undergoing some trials there, and I wanted obviously some pictures of the outside of the submarine. So they launched me in a little Gemini, which is a nasty little 2-man inflatable dinghy with an outboard motor, and I sort of went putt around this submarine taking pictures. This one actually was used as a front cover on the magazine. And we got to about here taking pictures around it, and it was coming towards us, and it did what apparently these Geminis often do, which is just cut out and wouldn't start again. And the able seaman who was with me, sort of steering the boat while I was taking the pictures, was frantically trying to restart the engine, pulling on the starting rope and pulling it, and he still wouldn't start. And I was beginning to wonder what would happen when the submarine actually got to us. I'd imagine it might be, dragged down the side of the submarine and spat out through the propeller, but that didn't happen, obviously. Anyway, it did finally start just at the last minute, and we managed to sort of put out of the way, and HMS Repulse went past. Very powerful boats. The second time I worked with nuclear submarines was in 1984, and I went up, and actually I did 2 nuclear submarine jobs in the same year. The first one early in the year was on board HMS Valiant, which was a hunter-killer submarine. This is the room or area that controls the buoyancy of the submarine, deals with the flooding of various tubes. This is the torpedo compartment with the weapons officer, and this is the torpedo storage area where the missiles are loaded into the torpedo tubes up in the front. This is the periscope on the bridge. I should explain that the red light is put on at night. It helps with night vision as far as the periscope operator is concerned, but also it serves to tell the difference between night and day. The whole boat is lit with red light at night and white light during the day, so that when they're submerged for long periods of time, everybody has a sense of what's nighttime and what's daytime. This is HMS Swiftsure. I'm afraid I didn't get very many pictures of this boat, which will become obvious as I explain what happened. This is the wardroom. I was given a bunk in the forward torpedo compartment where there were some empty racks. It wasn't carrying a full load of missiles, and where the missiles would normally be bolted down, there was a shallow fiberglass pallet. I had one which was about 5 feet off the ground, and you get into the pallet and you get into your sleeping bag and strap yourself in. Well, at 1 o'clock in the morning, my pallet turned out not to have been bolted down, and I was thrown off the rack with the bunk still strapped to my back, and I hit a steel rail 5 feet below me, and that was a bit of a rude awakening, to tell you the truth. It broke my arm very badly, and being a hunter-killer rather than a Polaris boat, it didn't have a doctor. It only had a medic who was an able seaman, and he only had 2 things in his armoury. One was paracetamol and the other was morphine. and he'd never given anybody any morphine and didn't intend to start now. I had quite a badly broken arm. It turned out to be a collis fracture with 7 breaks into the joint. So not surprisingly, it was a bit more painful than you'd normally use paracetamol for. They couldn't get me off the boat for 15 hours. We were out at sea, and they couldn't get me off via the helicopter because it was too rough apparently. So as I say, 15 hours later they sort of strapped me up. My arm wasn't put in a splint, but it was strapped to my body inside a coat with a life jacket, and they managed to get me onto the casing, as they call it. Having a 3 Mile Island type reactor, it wasn't allowed within 2 miles, I think, of land. So they sent a tender for me, which is a small tug, and a nuclear submarine is a bit like an iceberg. There's an awful lot of it under the water. So the tender was crashing along the side, and it was banging into the submarine, but there was still about 8 feet of water between the casing that was above the water and the tender. And as you can see from these pictures, they're really not very wide. So I had a 10-foot run up to make an 8-foot jump with my right arm strapped to my body, which I felt a bit vulnerable. And then they decided it'd be a good idea to tie a rope around me. And I thought, that's just so they can find the body. Anyway, I made the jump, largely because the people on board the tender reached out and grabbed me before I hit the water, I think. We then went to the Kyle of Lockhouse, where there was a car waiting for me, and the driver said, I've got to take you to the commanding officer. I said, I want to go to a doctor. I'm in a lot of pain, and I've had paracetamol. He said, unfortunately, I've got to take you to the commanding officer, my orders. So he took me to the commanding officer, and I was getting grumpy by then. I said, I want to see a doctor. All the commanding officer wanted to know is whether I signed a blood check. I told him I hadn't, and that I wanted to see a doctor, and that was it. The driver then took me to the local GP, where I sat in the waiting room with the various old ladies and people with colds and flu. And when my turn came, I went into the doctor's office. It was a long office. He just looked up from his desk. He said, I can see what's wrong with you. Have you had any pain relief? I said, paracetamol. He said, drop your trousers. So my troubles were over from that point. You know, he gave me a shot of morphine, and it didn't take the pain away, but I just stopped caring about it. And, you know, my sense of humour came back, and I was cracking jokes and, you know, quite jolly despite the pain, really. Anyway, the driver then took me to the local hospital, where they put me in a bed with a side rail on it so that I didn't climb out. I was trying to party and have a good time everywhere. Anyway, they mended it and all was well. That ended well. The cautionary note is really that I was not insured, and as a freelance photographer, you've got to work to do, and you have to maintain your level of income. The Radio Times that I was working for weren't liable. Only the Navy was liable, and getting money out of the Navy in those days was exceedingly difficult. It must have looked quite funny. I had a commission to go and photograph Brookside from a helicopter, and I hired an assistant to load my cameras because I couldn't load. But I could still move my finger to press the shutter and support the camera with the other hand. So I would sit in the door of this helicopter with my arm in plaster. It must have looked hilarious from the ground. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today's story, and if you have, remember to subscribe if you haven't already, like it, and share it. Next time, I'll tell you about my photography when the Red Arrows moved to the Hawks, developing new techniques for the new aircraft.